I'm going to begin with roll call, and you'll have to excuse us for having our backs to you, but that's the way we usually set it. Roll call, Sarah Kirby Gonzalez. Here. Cody Kazadi.
Here.
Jackie Wong will be here in about 10 minutes, and I am present. So we will now go for the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimously approved. Board study session, staff report on budget, and I just want to mention you will have an opportunity for public comments as well after the presentation. We really appreciate you all showing up, especially during this Christmas season. But we know how important the children are to everyone here, and we need your opinions. Many times, your insight and information. Thank you again.
Thank you, President McCall, Board of Trustees. This evening, the purpose of our study session is to take a look at our fiscal health as we prepare for the first interim report, which is due in the December board meeting. It's just not about the first interim report. It's about really taking a look at what are our structures within the budget, not just in this year, but the next 2 years out in our multi-year projection, but also even further out than our next 2 years. We're going to take a look at 5 years versus only 3 years, which I think is the more healthy thing to do. There's a couple things, while we receive this budget information and just kind of a review of what you already know as trustees, is that currently things are different now in the budget than they have been. And that is we're fully funded. Fully funded meaning that there is no more new money, as has been received in the past 8 years in all school districts in California. So that being said, the only new money that the state is allocating to public education at this moment, we say at this moment because we have a new governor coming in, at this moment is only a COLA. And what we also know is that COLA does not cover all of the district's operating expenses and compensation that increases each year. It does not cover that in any school district, not just ours. So that being said, what we'd like to do is take a look at what the first interim would look like next week when we present it to the board, as we've been crunching numbers. Our business department, our fiscal services department has been working hard trying to keep up with everyday changes to our budget and preparing as accurate as possible of a budget. So with that, I'll introduce...
Can I just say one thing real quick?
Yeah, certainly.
When you say fully funded, I think it needs to be made very clear, fully funded back down to 2008 levels.
Yes.
Because we're still a decade behind being
Right.
fully funded of what we should be at.
Correct. So thank you for that clarification. So fully funded, yes, we should continue to clarify that. That fully funded means that the governor, our past governor, going out governor, had promised public education for the 8 years that he was in office, that he would bring funding back to public education coming out of the recession. So that being said, in the past 8 years, every school district has been receiving millions of dollars to try to recover from money lost during that recession, of deferred payments, of deferred money where we never really received our full funding that we were promised, even though our students were generating that money. So that being said, it is a reminder to us, it's a 2007-2008 school year funding level, and it is the year 2018-2019. So thank you for that. So we have our Chief Business Official, Chris Mount Benitez, that's going to walk us through what our budget looks like in going into first interim.
Thank you. Let's see if I can knock something over. So good evening, trustees, colleagues, community members. I want to start out a little bit of an introduction. So tonight I'm supposed to not only stay more still because we're filming, but they also put a mic on me, so I'm starting to feel like I might get zapped or something the more I move. I want to say, by way of introduction, this is the second study session in my 5 months here, and I'm feeling a little bit like the bearer of bad tidings, right? I'm bringing data to the public, which isn't always easy to navigate or digest. We talked a lot about facilities. Tonight we're going to talk a lot about budget, and both of those topics are really complex ones for the district, and they're not a super rosy picture because we have some issues to deal with. So a little bit of good news. Stephanie Rule, one of my favorite newscasters, says there's always good news. So nutrition services, special education services, my transportation department, my fiscal department, IT, knocking out of the park. I don't have to do a study session to unveil all these concerns. So there's always good news out there. So I don't want to feel like I'm only doing study sessions when we have a crisis to deal with. And tonight is not a crisis to deal with. What we have is we are looking ahead and we're making sure that we are avoiding a crisis in 2 or 3 years, because that is the fiscal responsibility of mine to make sure that the board and my superintendent and the public is informed of exactly where we stand financially. So I'm going to move fairly quickly this evening. There were a bunch of handouts up there. Some of them we might use, some of them we might not, because I was trying to think about like what questions folks might ask or might want information on. So I have some handouts we might not even use, but I wanted them there just to be able to share in the event that a pertinent question comes up. So the main thing that we're going to look through tonight, I did do a PowerPoint presentation. I know that really excites everybody, right? I get to read through a bunch of slides to you, but you can at least take it home. You can digest it, you can send questions, and we welcome that because we want to think of what the community is thinking of. And that's really important to me, which is why we do these sessions with the board and with our colleagues. So really quickly, the California budget process and Washington Unified. I say Washington Unified, this really applies to most K-12 schools, unified school districts, which are a little bit different than elementary or high school unified districts, but we're a unified school district. So essentially, what you heard previously is that we are at full funding levels this year, restoring us to the 2008 promised funding in the state of California, and then adding on inflation. Now, after that, we're being told not to expect anything else other than cost of living allowances. But I want to just really quickly remind everybody of the budget process for a school district, because it's not like the budget process for almost anything else. Your household budget, private industry budget, remember that a budget, so think about your household budget, that's how I think about everything. So do it in a calendar year. You budget out your monthly expenses, let's say $1,000 for rent or mortgage, $12,000 for a year. And then if it's a little bit under or a little bit over at the end of the year, you rebudget that, right? Because you're a little bit under or over for the year, right? Same thing in private industry. Anything over or under the budget is called a variance, and then they try to replan the next year to be more accurate, okay? In public education, we don't do that. We change our budget 4 times every year as the state gives us new pieces of information to consider and add into our different formulas. Now, the state's the only mechanism that has a time machine as well, because one of the things they can also do is they can go back up to 2 fiscal years and change those formulas after the fact, right? Which is really fascinating because the money's already spent and the year's already closed. But when we talk about school budgets, it's 1 year at a time, okay? Why do they change so often? Every time we talk about budget, it changes because we adopt budgets multiple times throughout the year as we revise them and as those assumptions that the state gives us change. All right? So in mid-September, I'm sorry, I should start in June, we adopt the budget for the following year. Okay? That should appear odd to folks because we adopt a budget before the budget of the state of California is approved. Which is why the next thing we do is in September, if there's a significant change between June and what the state adopts as its budget, we do a 45-day revise to explain any differences between what we thought the budget was going to be and what's adopted. The next time that we revise the budget is the first interim. That's the presentation that we'll be doing with the board next week. You'll see a lot of those figures tonight, at least the preliminary figures. They'll change a little bit. And then in March or April, we do the second interim. So essentially what we're doing is we're adopting, and then every 4 months we update the budget to give everybody a more accurate picture of what the state is telling us. After we're done with the year, June ends. The following September, we then do fiscal close, so we finally tell everybody what was actually spent and what we actually got versus what everybody thought. So we don't get the final accurate picture until the September after the school year. And then in December, we produce the audit. So every year we're independently audited to make sure that what we think our financial picture is what the auditors think it is. Okay, we'll be presenting that next week as well. Happy to report, super clean audit. Nothing to look at, one of the cleanest audits we've ever had. One small thing to work on for attendance monitoring for one school. Okay, so all pretty good news, pretty straightforward, but that's sort of the introduction for where I'm going this evening. So that means that people that work on budget, and I have a fantastic budget and finance department headed by Kylie Lang, who's here this evening. I appreciate Kylie, and one of our financial analysts, Billy, is here this evening as well. So that's great you guys are here, because you get kudos tonight. They're on top of it. I'm constantly pushing deadlines. I'm constantly throwing variables at them, and they handle them very, very well. But budget people can be a little bit weird, and I include myself in that. And that's because we are thinking of the current year and constantly adjusting and reporting out to you. We're closing the year that we've already finished, and we're planning 2 to 3 years ahead, all at the same time. And so we very quickly confuse people because we always have to give people the perspective of what financial year are we talking about, or adjusting or restating. And so people very quickly go, oh my gosh, it's like you're thinking about 5 different years at the same time. That's correct. That's exactly what we do. Right? And any good fiscal office in the state of California for a K-12 school, that's exactly what they're doing all the time. So, we're fully funded. What does that mean? We've talked about that already. That means that other than COLA, cost of a living allowances, that we have the money that the state is saying that they're going to give us. Those revenues that we get, the LCFF funding formula, is driven by a formula. The formula is on one of these pages. You can all take it home, look at it as much as you want, but that formula determines how much money we get every year. The expenses are driven by the district. That's where the local control and decision-making comes in. The district decides what to spend their money on. Now, there's a lot of core stuff that we can't change. A teacher in every classroom, a principal at every school, I've got to pay the utility bills, I've got to pay the sewer bills, all that kind of stuff. Anything outside that core is left up to local determination. But I did put a saying up there that one of my superintendents before always said to me, and he said, remember though, that the culture of any institution eats strategy for lunch or breakfast. And what does that mean as far as budget? No matter how much we want to change and tell ourselves that we have local control, doing anything different than we've ever done is a major lift. Requires major effort. Okay? Same thing is true for budget. So if you want to know what is that formula, how much money do we get per kid? This is the formula at full funding levels for this year. So if I was to take as an example this 4th through 6th grade, let's say I have a 5th grader. This is the base amount I get for the 5th grader. If the 5th grader falls in one of the categories that traditionally experiences barriers to success in public education, we might get supplemental funding for that student. Our district is at 68% of those students, so we also get concentration money for that student. So a 5th grader in this district, that's the amount of money that we receive for them for the year. It then becomes math. You multiply those amounts times the number of students enrolled in each grade level, but then you have to change it by the number of days that they show up. So we only get, if you divide that number by 100, you only get it, the percentage for the percentage of days they show up. That's called positive enrollment accounting, which means we only get the money for the days that the students show up, which is why attendance is always so important for a public school district. So we do our best to determine our expenses every single year and track them, and we do a very good job here, but they can be a bit difficult to project. And some of them are beyond just saying, oh, we have local control. So salaries, we know we need a teacher in every classroom. We know we need custodians. We know we need bus drivers. So their salaries and the benefits attached to that are what generates the majority of our budget, over 80% here. Operations and maintenance. There's a law called routine restricted maintenance that mandates that we set aside 3% a year of our budget to pay for routine maintenance. That's groundskeepers, maintenance, that's custodial. It's doing routine stuff just to keep your buildings clean and in good shape. Right? Special education. So every year we get a little bit of federal funding from special education. The rest of it, or those additional services beyond the normal classroom services, come from the general fund as a contribution to special education. Healthcare and other benefit costs is a big driver for every school district. That's part of total compensation. Again, in this district, that's over 80% of our annual budget. And then retirement contributions, that's a little misleading to people. They go, what do you mean retirement? That's pension contribution. So in the state of California, that's California PERS and STIRS, depending upon which system you fall into.
Does the healthcare and other benefits factor in post-employment healthcare benefits?
It can. It can. So OPEB's a great question to bring up. OPEB, OPEB, stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. Those are any benefits that somebody qualifies for if they retire from a district and they meet the terms of the contract that's in place in that district, whether they might get some assistance after they retire in helping pay for benefits even though they've already retired. Most typically we see those for like vision, dental, and assistance with health care for employees that retire from a district after a certain number of years, but before they reach Medicare or Medicaid age. And we do have an OPEB liability in this district, which is what it's referred to as. So every year we pay the amount required by the contract that people retire under for the percentage that we're still assisting them.
You know how large that OPEB liability is?
I'd have to look it up. There's a report that we do every year called GASB 75, and it states exactly what it is for that year. Do you happen to know off the top of your head? Nope. Okay, I know, so I won't put you on the spot. Kylie's back there, so I was wondering. So she whips numbers off her head sometimes, and I'm like, how'd you know that? So I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so multi-year projections. Part of AB 1200, Assembly Bill 1200, and that was from the first school district in California going bankrupt. That was the District of Richmond. And it's now called West Contra Costa Unified. But AB 1200 was a result of that bankruptcy, and the state put into place some securities to make sure that that would be less likely to happen again. And so what that means is we have to submit, every time we adopt a budget, all 4 of those times, we are now required to submit our best projection for that year and 2 additional years to the county. The county gets those, they review them, they ask questions, and then they certify them and send them to the state. Okay? The certification status is either positive, negative, or qualified. Very straightforward. We are at a positive certification. So our multi-year projections are always based on assumptions. Those of you that work in mathematics at all always know that a solution set, or if you're working on logic functions, you have different variables and assumptions that always affect the math that you're doing, right? So if we're trying to project the annual increase in XYZ and we know that it's 2%, then that's our assumption, that we're going to increase that cost by 2%. Okay, so every multi-year projection that I show you has underlying assumptions that allow us to build the math to create the financial projections for the district. Where do we get those projections from? A lot of them are actually provided to us by different organizations, professional organizations in the state, and this is actually the current one. I just set it out because people keep asking me, where do you get those numbers from? Do you just make them up? No, we actually get a dartboard. This is the current dartboard. And this is what FCMAT and School Services of California are currently telling schools to base their assumptions on as far as cost of living, as far as additional costs that we should project going upward, including things like pension contributions. Okay, so we don't just make them up, we actually take them from where they're posted as an official site in the state. The other things that we use is we actually use calculators. So I would love to say that everybody in budget and finance is smart enough that we just come up with this stuff and it's in our head. We actually have very complex calculators that we use, that we input all the data from our district, and it helps us calculate costs very closely to what they would be, which is why we can stay so close. We're really good at our jobs, but we're not so good that we're all calculators in our heads. So those are the tools that we use. They're all available and free online. I usually take them from FCMAT, F-C-M-A-T. It's the best financial resource in California for people in my position to use, as well as in the fiscal departments.
So are these numbers usually spot on or conservative or sometimes liberal?
That's a really good question. FCMAT tends to be really reliable, but sometimes it's not the indicators that change, it's politics. So for example, this past year we started out at expecting a 2.61% COLA, right? And then the legislature saw the revenues coming in higher than expected, so they moved it up to a 2.75. And so that's what we based everything on. And then we adopted a budget, and we go out, and the legislature actually adopted a budget at 3%. Right? So they actually adopted a much higher COLA than they were being told was real. So that's where politics gets involved a little bit. So the next page, some multi-year projections as far as expenses. What are the things that we look at? We always look at the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. Why does that matter? That means that anything that's not salary or benefits, we actually project an increase year to year by the published CPI. That again is on the dartboard. Okay? And so anything that's not attached to a person, so like let's say copier paper, we always inflate the price of it by whatever they tell us to inflate the price. So these are the CPIs for the next 4 years listed. The other thing that we always look at that dartboard for are the increases to pension plan benefit costs. And so I actually made a mistake that I didn't catch until Kylie and I were looking at the presentation yet again today. And so I put up here a chart that I use in one of my calculators to determine how costs escalate from year to year. Okay, so you can see that for classified and teachers, these are the different rates that we pay, but I put PERS and STIRS. That's actually retirement and payroll taxes. That's both. And so what we put up front for everybody this evening, and mine suddenly disappeared, is there's a, may I borrow that for a moment? So I also had the question, well, how much do you spend on pension contributions? So this is a 3-year look just at pension contributions. You can see in the yellow blocks, we have STIRS, State Teacher Retirement System contributions. This year we will pay $8.3 million to that fund to pay for future retirement for our certificated staff. And then the blue, PERS, Public Employee Retirement System, we currently pay $2.3 million, that's this year, and you can see the amounts of increase over that for the next 2 years. So currently, if you add those together, we're currently paying $10.6 million, and that cost will escalate, really quick math here, about $1.1 million a year every year. Again, costs that we don't get to control. We are told what those contribution amounts are going to be. But somebody had asked that question, and I thought, and I appreciate again, Kylie and Billy, they whipped up a chart for me really quickly so I could explain it. So, multi-year projections. These are the things that we have to submit. These are the things we have to keep an eye on. And because the teacher in me just doesn't die, I'm going to teach everybody this evening how to read a multi-year projection, because that's what you wanted to do with a Wednesday night. Right? So the assumptions for this year's multi-year projections are essentially up here. So our funded ADA right now, 7428. That always gets a question. I'm going to ask the question because we're moving fast tonight. But Chris, that's not our enrollment number. That's correct. Our enrollment number is closer to 7,800 this year. This is that 7,800 after we multiply it by the average of 96% attendance. So we immediately, as soon as one student misses one day, we already are not getting the full amount of funding, right? It's a prorated amount based on the number of students with butts in seats that day. Okay? We have full funding of the LCFF funding formula. Our unduplicated percentage is about 68%. We have the CPI that we talked about, step and column. Step and column is the cost of an average employee. This is for all employees, classified, certificated, and management. What is the cost just for them staying one more year and moving up a step or over a column, depending upon levels of experience and education?
For my own edification
Yep.
and possibly others, is that 96% is
fairly high. It's not 100% that we would all want. So you've been in several school districts. Is 96% good, bad from a funding perspective, average?
But we are actually at the state average.
Okay.
We're actually at the
that's
state
good to know.
average.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we always look to try to improve that because it's one of the things that
Of
we
course.
can use to affect funding because we don't have a whole lot of options to
Yeah.
affect revenue, right?
Right.
But we're actually pretty good. So other than the biggest area that you'll probably see on the dashboard, not to let the rabbit out of the hat because I don't think it's published officially this year, but like tomorrow. Oh, well then you might hypothetically see that we need to work on people that are more consistently truant, not just day-to-day absences of an average student. So that's an area of improvement. That's an area that we can capture some
So
revenue.
investments in there might make some sense
It might.
as
It
revenue
might.
generating.
Correct, yeah, good point. Reserve for economic uncertainty. In this district, so the state requirement is 3%. In this district, we do 6%. Why? 3% pays between 3 and 4 weeks of the bills. So it's considered a bare minimum. In this district, we're at 6% of reserve, which means that we have about a month and a half of bills that we can pay if the money turns off. And it did turn off in 2008, right? That's why reserves are a big deal now, right? So FCMAT and CASBO, which are the more conservative financial advisory groups in the state, but they're the ones that advise me, and I listen to them, they're smart. They're saying that we should be moving to 10% or above, right? I haven't made that recommendation, that's not what I'm saying, but I'm just putting in perspective what we do here versus what is required, 3, right? The average reserves for a unified school district in the state right now are at 9%, okay? Our local requirement is 6. And the other thing, this is super important, because I'm going to move a bunch of numbers around on you really quick now. All of our adoptions and projections have been done with a baked-in reduction of $1.2 million starting next year. That was in the budget adoption presentation this past year. It was submitted that way, but it dramatically changes the numbers, which is what I'm going to show you. So, I semi-joke with people that all you need to do to be a CBO is to explain what's up on the board right now, and it's only a semi-joke. It's actually really true. I had a single sheet copy made so that you could use it without having to look at the big packet. Did everybody get a single sheet copy? Here's what I'd like everybody to do. Fold your copy along this line, so you're just looking at 18-19 this year. I'm going to show you how to use a multi-year projection and to tell immediately whether we're going to get a positive certification from the county and the state. So I've made these a little bit more detailed since I've been here, but I just want to show you really quickly how to read it, and then you can read all of them. Okay? So, revenues. Really, really straightforward. Those are the unrestricted general fund revenues that we get. That's our LCFF funding formula. Straight to the point. Expenses. Everything we plan on spending that year. Again, short and to the point. Right? That's everything. Salaries, benefits, operating costs, you name it. Excess deficit. Simple math. Subtract how much money you're getting in, just like you do at home, from how much your expenses are, and this is how much we're off. So when we adopted the budget in June, we adopted a budget with $151,841 planned deficit. When you adopt it and you know that it's a negative number, it's called a planned deficit. Okay, that's not a bad thing because we had money in the bank to pay for it. But just follow the math for a second. Beginning fund balance. This is the money in our savings account at the beginning of the year. So at the beginning of this year, in June, we were projecting that when we closed the books in September, we would have about $11.1 million in fund balance. That's our savings. If we subtract our planned deficit, that gives you a new fund balance. So then I break out the components of fund balance. So what's in this number that we plan on having in our savings account? The first part, that's that 6% that we need to save locally for hard times if they come. $60,000, that's what we just keep in what we call cash and revolving stores. In district, that's our day-to-day operating money that we keep on hand in a district this size. That amount goes up in a bigger district or down in a smaller district. And then we end up with, at the end of the year, how much do we think we're going to have that there's no plans for yet? This is just uncommitted, unplanned for, unmarked money in our savings account. Everybody following that? General nod. Awesome. What the county looks for is this last line after our reserves. Is it in the positive for the current operating year and 2 more years? So at adoption, looking at this multi-year projection, we're in good shape. But I just told you one of the assumptions that we adopted this budget on. And that is that we reduced this expense line by $1.2 million, which means that our actual projection of fund balance here is $1.2 million lower. If you reduce something here, then you've also reduced it in the next year. So this is $1.2 million lower, which means that our ending fund balance was in the negative. Okay? That's okay because we said that we were planning a reduction for the 1920 school year, but we already knew that without that reduction that we were not in positive territory for 3 years unless we made our budget adoption with that note that we were going to make those reductions.
So 1.2, 1.2, or the total 2.4?
That's a great question. If you don't take things out, they multiply like rabbits, and if you do take things out, they save like rabbits, or they multiply like rabbits. So this is reduced by 1.2 million and all the associated costs with those reductions. Like let's say that if they were positions, all the benefits. So it's been removed from here. It's also been removed from here. So the total net is actually 2.4. Absolutely. Numbers multiply from year to year unless you keep them real, which is why I always just put it out there, and then until we adopt an actual plan, there's no plan. So we adopted this with 1.2, with some general ideas of where we would take those savings from, but nothing specific. So now you're going to see numbers start to dance in front of your eyes. Okay? Magic of numbers. So here's what we adopted. And you have all these numbers in front of you. Here's what Kylie and I got up in front of the board at the 45-day revise, and we presented to you as the revisions. So what happened that our $150,000 deficit is now $800,000 here. And notice, though, that the ending balance is higher. But the reduction in expenses is still baked in, 1.2 and 1.2. So what happened? Here's what happened. Remember when I said the assumptions change? So our funding formula changed after the budget adopted because the state adopted a higher cost of living that I told you about. They put it up to 3%. And they changed our base LCFF funding formula because they took some of the one-time money that they promised us and they put it on the base funding formula. And we had 100 fewer students show up for school. Okay? All 3 of those things happened in the first month and a half of school. So everything just changed. But how is it possible? So that what that means is that this number, so now I've broken out the revenues a little bit more, because that's just the way I like to see it. So how is it that revenues go down $700,000, but our projected ending fund balance goes up? Right? Because at that point, we were already looking to change the assumptions to try to mitigate a now $800,000 deficit. The other thing that happened is when we lost $700,000 here, because they gave it to us instead of one-time money in ongoing money, this base amount went up every year. So again, remember I said negative numbers multiply like rabbits, so do positive numbers. So those positive numbers now, we're actually getting more money in our base allowance every year. So the end result for the same scenario, even though the in-year deficit went up, the ending fund balance went up. Again, positive certification from the county. But the thing that's still in there is that $1.2 million reduction that's just sort of vague that we're promising to make. Okay? We're going to dance.
Does this include the $1.2 million? No.
The reduction,
The reduction in the 1920?
the reduction is here
So it is included in the.
and here. It is included here.
I guess reiterate that this projection.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was in open board that we talked about.
Yes, yes, we did. And so then you also have to look at how much, so our revenues actually went down less than we initially thought they were going to with losing 100 students. And that's because there's a little bit of a safety net there. And that is that the state in the LCFF calculator, it's a fascinating calculator you can get online, it actually gives you a 3-year step down. So that if you lose enrollment, it just doesn't, the hatchet doesn't drop all at once. So it's called smoothing the trend. So they smooth it out a little bit by using a 3-year average so that we just don't have all the loss at once. Right? So we lose a little bit, but basically what we started now is looking at lower enrollment. So we've been going up in enrollment for a while, so are we going to go down? Now it's a 1-year point at this point. So what changed, right? So we removed the projected reductions in expenses out of 1.2 million. And I apologize, I didn't give the appropriate introduction to this slide. These are the things I'm changing to show you in the next slide. Okay? So why is the next slide going to be so dramatically different? The reason is I wanted to take out that $1.2 million in promised reductions so that I could see what does the budget look like if I don't just put in a vague reduction, right? I got to know what that looks like because I didn't know what the reductions were yet. Okay? So if I take that out and if I change our ADA and enrollment to reflect what happened this year, that loss of 100 students.
So wait, so
Mhm.
this assumption also assumes that we will lose an additional 100 the following year?
Nope, I did flat.
Flat 100.
So I said, okay, we lost 100, maybe that's going to be 100 that we never get back, and let's just say it's just going to stay the same every year.
Okay, so there's no.
Yeah, it's not going to go up, it's not going to go down. Now, that's magical thinking, I know that.
I get
but-
that, that's what projections are, we
Yeah.
don't know who's going to show up and who's not. gonna
Right,
show
so
up.
these are all, that's why I'm giving you my assumptions, so I assumed flat. Now, here's a nice point. So we closed the books last year, and throughout the district, taking back people's money that they didn't spend their budgets entirely, because we only do 1-year budget at a time, we got to add $330,000 to the fund balance, because everybody didn't spend all of their pennies, whether it's at school sites or a department. Okay? We also started in the financial office, started doing ongoing expense monitoring and reductions to try to mitigate that $800,000 deficit this year so that we can not have as bad of an impact this year. So that's been a bunch of things. That's Kylie and Billy and the payroll department working on, hey, we have a vacancy. Every month, let's take that money back and put it in unencumbered. That's, hey, what contracts can we give up? What little things can we nibble away at? That's, for example, we haven't had an assistant superintendent of HR now for, feels like forever. 5 months, so Linda and Pam and I have been covering that. So positions that we haven't filled yet, we've just been trying to take the savings, so that's in there. I added a $370,000 bus replacement schedule. You might say, why on earth are you doing that? Because we have a big transportation program that we haven't been replacing buses on, and I don't have a choice anymore if I want to keep the transportation program going. Okay? Gotta have safe buses for our kids. Added a $200 deferred maintenance account to assist in deferred maintenance. So we talked about routine maintenance, keeping the schools clean, changing the light bulbs, making sure the water fountain's fixed. But one of the big issues we have here is our deferred maintenance account. We don't have one. We've promised all of that money to pay what we call non-voter internal debt, right? Which means loans that we've taken out, COPs. Okay? So we don't have a deferred maintenance account. So if I have, I'll use a real example. Stonegate. Anybody here from Stonegate? Right? Oh, so the eaves troughs at Stonegate. Those eaves troughs are only, this is my nightmares, I know, my headache. They're only 11 years old. They're good, solid metal eaves troughs, and they're already leaking. Right? I need to replace them. I want to replace them. I don't have any money to replace them. I don't have a deferred maintenance account to do that work. Okay, so all I can do is keep cleaning them out and hoping that they last another year. That's what happens when you don't have a deferred maintenance account.
So
Okay.
just as kind of a statewide issue, deferred
Yep.
maintenance when we were in rough times across the districts statewide, a lot of people, is this abnormal to not have a deferred maintenance account? Was out of curiosity, because I think that's a question that people, why?
That's a great question.
As you take us away.
So, most districts use income that's not LCFF tied, so ignore the funding formula for a second. We have other local revenues that we get, and specifically in West Sacramento and in most school districts, it's mostly from, as you go to get a permit, so imagine you remodel your bathroom, right? They make you take a permit to change your toilet, right? Or they make you take a permit to put on a new door if you're doing it above board, right? A portion of that, tiny little portion, might go to different things like parks or schools. We get, one of our sources of revenue is called developer fees. So every new home that's built, every new thing that you see built in West Sacramento, we've had a lot of development, we get fees that come to the school district, and that is what most districts use to do their deferred maintenance. Gutter replacement, new fences, painting, refreshing things that are more than just the day-to-day what we can do, right? In this district, we've promised those monies to paying off loans that we took internally to do some big projects. Okay?
But is that, so that's normal practice for a school district?
That's where I get into opinion. I've not seen it like this before.
Interesting. How is it normally?
Typically, you used your fees that you get from construction to do deferred maintenance projects. You save them up and you put on a roof. You save them up, you change out those eaves troughs at Stonegate. Maybe I want to put in a nice tree courtyard because one of the Stonegate courtyards is just too much cement for me, and I think it would be much more conducive to learning if they had a little green out there, right?
Yeah.
Those are the types of things that I can do that are not routine. Those are little extra projects, right? But they make our campuses nicer and they make them feel nicer. So most districts, that's what they do with that money. Here, we took that money and we said, we went to a bank and we said, can we get a bunch of money up front and we will promise you this money in the long term?
So 10 years ago when those things were built, that's what was used as collateral, if you will?
Correct. Yep.
So when those projects were done 10 years ago, that's interesting.
Yep. And
That's
I actually have a
interesting,
breakdown of
yeah.
those things too. Yep.
Yeah.
So what's the result of changing all these variables? So this is where, when I did this first projection, I did it a while ago, so it wasn't like an aha moment that I had last week for this presentation. But I looked at it and I said, uh-oh. If I just look at taking out the numbers that multiply from year to year, because we're just using placeholders, then right now we have a healthy enough bank balance that this year, we're okay. Next year, we're still okay. 2 years, we're not okay. And we're not okay by a little bit of a change, right? We now have blown through our 6% reserve in 2 years, okay? A couple of interesting things to notice. Notice, and first of all, this says preliminary because I'm going to get hit upside the head if I don't point out this is preliminary. We first interim next week. We'll be done reconciling everything, so these numbers will change a little bit, but this is pretty close. But you'll notice this number went down again. This is us collecting savings and applying it to this year to see if we can reduce our deficit. Okay? That's that work that we do to try to make sure that our costs are contained. But what happens 2 years out is we have a big deficit right there that is not quite equal to our 6%, but it doesn't leave much at all left in the school district at that point. Okay? So that's the point. When we take out all the assumptions that we really don't know, that was the point that we said, wow, we've really got to work on this because 2 years is not a long time. That's also why we do these, so that we know what's going on, so that we can prevent it.
And also assume this is subject to whatever the legislature wants to do with everything else that's in Prop 98, funding Prop 98, including the base, not the base. So this is just without any of those assumptions or those plans.
This is all projections based on what we know as of, I don't know, 3 days ago when I finished this up. So for example, notice I didn't put in any one-time money. There are some CBOs, I'd say about half of them in the state right now are betting we're going to get some sort of one-time money again. Now, we're not supposed to balance the budget on one-time money because it's one-time money, right? But that might help us mitigate that. I'm not going to know that. They're going to start giving me all sorts of projections starting in January. All the way through we adopt the budget, it's going to change every week with whatever news release comes out. But I won't know for sure until the actual budget's adopted by the legislature. So right now, this is based on the facts I know. They might increase the base funding. That would be great.
So, just because I looked at the interesting district, we were waiting on mandated cost reimbursements that were 10 years, whatever, 5 years old.
Yep.
The mandated cost reimbursements that we're getting right now, what are they from? What year? Do you remember what year they're from?
So we keep a schedule
Right. I don't
of when
recall,
they're
but-
paying us back. Mandated cost reimbursements, this line, one-time
Yeah.
money, is for things we've done that the state requires us to do. That's what Trustee Huang is saying, right? But they're always behind in paying us back. It's work we've already done that they say, you have to do it, but we're not going to give you money for it until we have money. So at this point, they're about 6 years behind. So this is from 6 years ago. Jerry Brown actually almost caught it up. And I thought that was going to be what they did, was try to catch it up this year as well and just pay us off, and then year to year they reimburse us, but they didn't do that. So at this point, they're about 5 years behind. Yeah. So these things can change depending upon what starts to happen with next year's budget in the state. Best numbers we have as of today. So the question then becomes, how do we get back on track? Because what we don't want to do is wait and then 2 years from now find ourselves with our backs up against the wall and saying, oh my gosh, what do we do next, right? So we have to plan now. We have to plan proactively. And the other thing is, remember, those good numbers multiply year to year really quickly. So we want to start getting more good numbers up on the board so that we have more security and not less, okay? So how do we get back on track? Revenues are driven by the state formula. They're unlikely to dramatically increase. That's what we're being told right now before Gavin comes into office. Right now, he's in that Pollyanna period, man.
You know him as Gavin?
Huh?
You know him as Gavin?
No, but we all know who we're talking about now, right? He's promising everybody everything. So it's going to be interesting to see what he actually makes his priority when he gets into office. Everybody's waiting and watching and saying, what's he actually going to do? Maybe it will be education again. Who knows?
Well, he said today that after the legislature put several bills that cost over $40 billion, these people need to whittle it back a bit.
A bit.
A bit.
A bit is a good way of putting it. Expenses are going up.
Ting has put out his budget plan that has education funding.
Right,
So,
35 billion there.
yeah.
And I'm also hoping for some special education funding.
Oh,
Yeah.
Assemblymember Ting has that in his
Great.
proposal.
So expenses are also going up now much faster than the money that we're getting in. So gone are the days of catch-up where we're getting $3, $4, $7 million more a year. No, a couple $1 million for cost of living across all expense areas. Okay? So what will it take? So to bring this within a reasonable 5-year projection, which I'll show you in a second, instead of a $1.2 million in reduction that we put in 2 different places, what we actually need is a $3.2 million reduction. And if you're curious, that's 3.6%, 3.64% of our budget, to get us into long-term fiscal solvency. Now, again, the assumptions that we make. That's assuming everything stays the same. One thing I can promise you in any institution, organization, especially education, nothing ever stays the same. But as of today, and what I know today, if I can say everything stays the same from here on out, okay, I'm trying, $3.2 million will get us into 5-year fiscal solvency, which is as far as I can comfortably go ahead without saying the numbers are just whack, right? Going too far out. So what does that look like? Okay? This is with a $3.2 million reduction. So this year largely stays the same. Okay? We're going to continue to work on this number and see if we can whittle it down to give us some more money in the bank. Okay? Look at the expense line. Notice that with a $3.2 million reduction, this is really important. So now we have the assumption that we're reducing $3.2 million, but notice what happens to expenses still. So expenses still go up from 78.8 to 79.1. They're just going up slower. But that tells you how much our expenses go up every year if we can reduce $3.2 million and still have them go up by over $1 million. Okay? So we're reducing how fast our expenses go up. Here's another important thing to notice, because everybody says, well, is that it? Will $3.2 million solve all the problems? Well, notice what $3.2 million does. It does not take away a structural deficit. That's me being really conservative with my recommendation to the board and to my superintendent, because I'm not trying to just break the system. I'm saying, what's the least amount of cut that we can do, but keep this number in the positive, not just for 3 years, but for 5 years. Okay? So I'm not looking for 3-year solvency, I'm looking for 5-year. This means that anything new we add to the budget in the future, we have to take something away of equal or greater value just to maintain status quo.
Can you explain, you originally said 1.2, now you're moving to 3.2.
Yeah.
So, can you explain that a little bit?
Sure.
I'm not as smart as others in the room who may understand that a little bit better. So
well-
you originally said 1.2 and now you're sharing us 3.2.
Right. So the original earmark in the budget was for a $1.2 million reduction,
Correct?
right? And it was $1.2 million that was then carried forward in a straight line from one year to the next, right? So there's another 1.2 missing out of here, right? So expenses don't work that way. Expenses don't work just in a straight line fashion like that. So what we actually did is we created a $2.4 million difference, right? We're actually reducing here by 2.4